Well, good morning from Central Texas in the United States. It's about 7 a.m. here, so I'm sure it's all hours of the day wherever you may be worldwide. It's my fourth year presenting at the iMoot, and this is one of the events that I really like to promote and be involved with. I think it's amazing how many sessions, how much variety of sessions, and how many individuals kind of come together on this total virtual Moodle Moot, which is a kind of very unique experience for all those involved and all those who are able to watch the videos after and to get involved in that way. This is an amazing experience from both a presenter and being able to either watch the live sessions or to watch the sessions after the fact on YouTube. And I think it's a really invaluable resource that we're all part of, and that gets kind of given to the community after as a repository of hundreds of videos, all on kind of various subjects of Moodle and how to make Moodle better and how to use it. So I am Joseph Thibault. I work at a startup in the United States out of Baltimore, Maryland, which is on the East Coast. Is about maybe 1,500 miles from where I currently reside. My wife is in the Army, so we're located near an Army base. And I also run Moodle News, which was I guess a niche blog just created to kind of help me have an outlet to talk about the things that I thought were exciting for Moodle. So try to keep my head at the forefront of what's happening with Moodle, but also have this other kind of day job, if you will, where I get to use Moodle, which is very nice. And I also get to kind of think about policy in education and especially higher education. We offer college level courses and the operational pieces that help to make those courses work. It's a little bit of a unique model at Straighterline where we are offering courses that are self-paced generally, and students can get student support through tutoring or through by connecting with a faculty kind of on a ad hoc basis as needed. But we try to give the students as much upfront information, as much context as they need in order to go through the courses. One of the things that has kind of happened as a product of that is that we've really started to take a look at the data that is created, the learning analytics, the number of clicks, the grade data, the completion data, all of that information that's created as part of the student experience to help us to better understand what we can do to make the student experience better, and also to make the student more likely to succeed. Ultimately, what we want is to make sure that we have happy students who are going on and getting credit for these courses and going on to their university or to college and making a better way and a less expensive tuition bill. If you are privy to any of the kind of news in the U.S. or in some cases, kind of a worldwide issue, the cost of higher education is very high, and it's kind of outpacing what students are willing to pay. So lower cost options, which is what we focus on at Straighterline, are really kind of what what I think is helping to be a release valve for some of that issue. So all of that is kind of preface for the fact that using information that's created by students or through different venues in order to, or for feedback loops for all of sorts of different information is a great way to make improvements in courses. They don't have to be in Moodle. This is not a Moodle specific presentation per se. We do use Blackboard as well, so there are other learning management systems that we've used and that we are able to get the same information from. More, it's just some thoughts about how I've used data in the past to help improve courses. So now the title is Respect for Small Data, and so that would imply that there is some notion of big data. So I have a quote from the CEO of Newton, which is a very large adaptive learning company in the U.S. They work with almost every single publisher, kind of the mega publishers, Cengage and Pearson and all of the like, to take the data and the metadata and the student experience of students going through content and assessment in order to use that data in order to kind of create some type of improvement. So his definition was that big data is the mathematics of effectiveness. It aggregates the data at scale. It doesn't work at a small scale. Now, I call bullshit on that in the fact that the small data, smaller data sets, 100 students, 200 students, 1,000 rows of Excel. You don't have to have a million data sets or a million entries into a table to figure out what you can do to make a course improvement. And course improvement being pretty closely tied to effectiveness. So my definition of small data would be data that measures effectiveness on a more personal level. So you're trying to create that feedback loop either directly with the student or directly with the class in order to say or to glean information that helps to inform course improvements. So I think at the base level, my role is about kind of looking at the same two questions that a student is looking at any given time when they're enrolled in the course. And those two questions would be, from the student side, am I going to be happy with the experience? Is this going to be enjoyable? Am I going to be totally pissed off if, when I go through the course and it's not what I expected? Or am I going to succeed for whatever benchmark I'm going to be assessing the student on? And from the student perspective, anything that I'm going to be assessed on, I want to be damn sure that I'm going to be learning that material. You can't expect students to attend the lecture, to do the reading, and then assess them on something totally different. That's where there's all sorts of friction that happens. I think there always will be a slight disconnect between assessment and kind of inputs and outputs, or throughputs and outputs rather, for the educational experience, because each person is quite frankly is different. But there's a way to kind of make those as closely aligned as possible, and looking at data is a good way to do it. So when I'm thinking about it, are my students happy? Are they going through the experience? Do they enjoy it? Do they value this experience? And conversely, are they going to succeed? It's not always predicated on the student and their competency. I firmly believe that difficult content, if presented in the correct way, can be understood by the students who are coming from a really kind of wide spectrum of experiences and abilities. And it's just about trying to affect, I don't want to lower the bar by changing the assessment. I want to lower the bar by giving the students better content, better experience, better information and instruction in order to achieve. So, those are the two questions we're constantly thinking about, and trying to impact. So, I've created what I will call the Punnett square of student experience, and you may recognize this a little bit from Biology 101. So, a Punnett square being kind of a hereditary chart of how somebody gets blue eyes or brown eyes. And in this case, we're going to look at the Punnett square based on success and experience. And this is trademarked. I'm going to patent this, and then we're going to try to do a worldwide speaking tour all about this. That was a joke. Anyway, so in terms of success, you can have students that pass, and you can have students that fail. And in terms of experience, you can have happy students, and you can have unhappy students. So the result of this is only there's four possibilities, obviously. So you can have students who get an A and they're really happy. You can have students that still pass, but are totally pissed with the experience that they had. There was too many roadblocks. They're totally proficient. They proved that they're proficient, but it seems that whoever is the teacher, the courseware provider, whoever it may be that's delivering the experience is just throwing up roadblocks. The experience is just unsettling to the student. Now, likewise, you can have students that fail, but they have a good experience. They enjoyed the content, but there's something incorrect, or there's something about the delivery that's preventing the students from being successful. And it could be that it's there's just roadblocks put up or something like that, or they enjoyed the content, but they're not quite seeing the connection to the assessment. And then of course you get this, the student who's unhappy and fails is kind of the worst possible product of the situation where you're trying to deliver an online course. They have trouble logging in. They're continually kind of running up against the system in order to try to work through the material. It's unclear what they're supposed to be doing for assignments, and you're giving them cues to take assessments before they're actually prepared. Those are the situations where that the student is very unhappy. So what I'd like to focus on are there's 4 ways that I can recall that are very simple in terms of how I have trying to impact and get students back in this kind of the green area. Ultimately is where I want all students to be. There may be still a few students who are unhappy and passing, and definitely students who are happy but are failing. But these 2, I definitely want to minimize. I want to eliminate the students who are unhappy with the experience overall and also are not able to fail. I'd much rather have students who have a happy experience and are passing, or at least are having a good experience with the content, with the type of assessment, so that they're still learning. That really is the ultimate goal. So in the past, we've just as kind of context and setup, this is real kind of, I'm going to make a lot of assumptions here and presume that this is applicable now, but this is really based on personal experience working with a very specific delivery method for courses that I have at Straighterline. So we are delivering generally courses at scale. We're doing kind of 101 courses in college, the general education requirements. Our most popular courses are English composition and college algebra. So those are real 2 kind of playing fields that I'm constantly working with. We have thousands of students. We're assessing students in a range of maybe 1,500 to 2,000 essays per month are getting graded by staff that we have available. They're usually kind of adjunct position or above. There may be faculty also who are basically grading papers based on a rubric on a first come, first served basis with students. It's remote, but it works very efficiently. But there are some kind of consistency in terms of grading when you have many different people all working on a similar standard can be a challenge. We're also going to I'll talk a little bit about improving student writing, about improving the assessment of that writing, how we've looked at students reporting their ratings and kind of this idea of a net promoter score, which is the NPS acronym. It's more of a kind of marketing tool, but I think it's important to, it's exactly the same as ratings, to be honest. But it's a tool to put a specific measurement or ruler that you can use and apply across the board in order to make and discern a few trends and stuff like that. And then we'll talk about objectivity and consistency in quantitative assessment and how that has that impacted how we better understand the course experience over time. So the first rule of using small data would be to pick something to measure. On the 4 different examples that we had previously, those are very good, in general, those are things I think you can impact, but it's hard to impact anything if you're not creating a specific and consistent metric across the board for measurement. And so, like, as a quick example, if one course is rated on a scale of 1 to 10, and another course is rated on a if 5 smiley faces, the meh face, the unhappy face, the happy face, and the angry face, those are not consistent measurements. In a sense, it's that we're asking totally 2 different things from students. Picking a consistent measurement, being consistent about the application of that is going to be key to being able to get data in any measurement or any size sample and to leverage that. So a few examples of information that you can start to look at, and most of which I think that you probably are already tracking. So ratings at the end of course, what are student evaluations look like? This notion of an NPS score, which is similar to ratings. I'll use those kind of interchangeably as we go. The number of times a student is reaching out for help and coding those in terms of what and why they're reaching out. The number of emails you might be getting in terms of support. If you're getting 100 emails a day for a very specific reason, it might make sense to kind of look at that over time to see what might be done in order to trend that down. They ultimately, if a student is reaching out, there's more than likely there are other students having the same problem and they're not reaching out. So that, flipping or fixing the problem at the source is the kind of ultimate goal of this, about using data. We try to increase that or to decrease the number of emails or to fix that. The number of flagged or problematic submissions would be one example that we use for like plagiarism or citation issues or students trying to understand written assignment instructions. The number or the percentage of completers for students as they're coming through your courses, average grades, average scores, looking at different graders all grading the same assignment and see what is their variance, and if there is, what can be done to address that. The number of submissions by week, by students to find out if they're speeding up or slowing down, or just to look at it in terms of, how much do I need to stack this up in order to keep a good, high quality turnaround and something that's quick for students, and on and on. Moodle is ripe for data. There's a ton available either through the standard reports that are available, but also through parts of the site through specific or general SQL queries, kind of getting into the custom reports and stuff like that. There are a host of other presentations all about getting the data and what reports you might be able to run. I'm not going to go into those specifically, but I implore you to kind of check those out. I think there's the second session run actually focus specifically on SQL queries that can be run on Moodle. And it's all that is about is getting information to be able to use that in a meaningful way. And I'm sure that you have other ideas of other data. And if you want to kind of shout those out in the chat and kind of give a list of the other pieces of information you might look at currently. What do you use as a thermometer to gauge any aspect of a course success, or how do you know if you're doing good from students? Those are, if you want to just put those in the chat box, I welcome it. Get some good ideas, I'm sure. And then so the last piece about the examples of information that are available would be to make sure that you're making a concerted effort to look at those on some type of regularity. If I do course ratings and I get that information and then I do that in February, and then I make some changes and I never look at that again, you have really kind of lost the. I don't think that is an effective way of using the information to try to decide how and if you're actually impacting the things you're trying to impact. So in terms of in writing, we're looking to, and over the past and kind of since we got started, to give really clear instructions to students on what type of essays and what type of written work we want them to submit. So originally, this was done in Blackboard, and we were using maybe a 7-point rubric. It was rubric-based, but it was not necessarily as specific as it could be. So one of the things that we found is that by improving our assignment instructions and improving the rubric and providing that as information prior to the student making a submission, we've been able to affect students' scores. There have been less complaints. We've seen the number of issues that students have. We've seen the number of complaints about the grading, students being or assuming that they're writing at one level, but then us realizing and showing them or reflecting that they're rating at a totally different level because of nuances in the rubric. it's important to be, I find it very important to be transparent to the students in terms of the expectations that we're setting. We want to, kind of eliminate that shock and awe of the student thinking one thing and then realizing something totally different based on feedback. So we've been through maybe 4 or 5 iterations of the same assignment rubrics, as we've improved, as we've changed very slightly assignment requirements. Those are now reflected in the kind of the courseware or the experience that students are getting, and as they're seeing the assignment instructions and working through that material. So we originally were using the kind of basic rubric system provided in a third-party system called Smart Thinking, which is tutoring and essay evaluation. We have transitioned that to using the rubric system, simple rubrics in Blackboard. Then we moved on to using the rubric system in Moodle when that was introduced in like the 2.2, 2.3 range. Then, and most recently, we've moved to using Turnitin's rubric system, which I have, give a huge thumbs up and kudos to. It's an excellent, really robust tool, in addition to providing the originality reports, which is kind of an essential piece of online writing, I think. So, those tools have provided us really kind of a battery of implements to help students to understand, what we're looking for, and how they're going to be assessed. Giving students the ability to see their draft and to see their originality reports has been another piece that's been kind of really key to this. So over time, what we've seen by improving our rubrics is that we are able to eliminate the frustration that students might have by not having clear expectations. And that was measured specifically by the number of tickets as we've gone up over time. So that's the quantitative metric that we were looking at, or that data set is specifically the number of times students are saying or are expressing frustration. It can be reflected in end of course evaluations, but it also can be reflected in simply by monitoring over time the number of times we're either getting an email directly because that information is very specifically posted if a student has a problem, or through what we have like some type of help desk system where they get coded or kind of put into a specific label, if you will. If you're using Gmail, that's probably the best analogy I have. It's a help desk. It has different divisions or departments rather, and they're all kind of organized by that. Being organized as grading specifically has helped us kind of look at that and trend over time and analyze it. The second piece that we looked at was for writing, combating citation issues and plagiarism was a way for us to be proactive in a way that in a particular issue with online education that is really kind of important. It's been around, plagiarism has been around for a long, long time, but online education has provided or has kind of introduced some real nuance to combating it. It's very easy to find content to copy and paste. It's very easy to get citation process wrong, to do it incorrectly. It's very easy to also run originality reports. But there's a disconnect between students understanding what an originality report, what proper citation is, etc. So what we've done, and a few tools that we introduced, we have been tracking, and we are seeing a really high percentage of students who just didn't, not that they were just outright plagiarists, but they didn't understand citation issues. And those we are the way that we grade first in, first out, anytime that a paper has a kind of problematic citation or it's very unoriginal, there's a lot of copied material, basically it gets flagged and it gets worked through with a specific staff member. So we have a very clear metric of how many papers are getting flagged on a regular basis, and that's something that we look at really closely. So what we did, we said, all right, we want to reduce the number of papers that are getting flagged. We want them to definitely get the information. We want students to be able to, we don't want them to be flagged. We want students to be evaluated. In a sense, in order to do that, though, we need to address citation issues and originality. So in order to do so, we did two things. We have a quiz, basically, and a lesson that students have to go through in order to unlock any of the assessments in their course. And that includes any of the papers that have to be submitted for evaluation. And so that allowed us to at least to guarantee that 100% of our students were going through a common kind of plagiarism tutorial and citation tutorial before they got started. Put everybody on a level playing field. You had to kind of agree to doing this. It was just one way to kind of throw up a small roadblock that ensured that we were at least getting the right information across to students before it became a huge deal later when they submit 10 different essays, all plagiarized. That immediately we saw started to reduce the number of flagged essays because students were privy to what we're looking for, etc. We also started providing all the rubrics similarly, either next to the assignment or part of the plagiarism quiz, and we built a we kind of scoped out and built a MLA guide for citation and a citation generator that's easy for students to use so that they're going to get that correct. They're going to understand the different citations and that process and being used. And over time, what we've seen is the percentage of plagiarism, which may have been as high as maybe like 6% about 18 months ago, has gone down to maybe 1% or less. And that's because we're very proactive in addressing these issues with students and have tweaked outside of even just the data and the metrics, a few tweaks to policy for the fact of, if a student has a problem early on, we address that immediately with the student so that we're not looking at it after the fact and we're saying, all right, well, you submitted all your essays and they all been graded, but 50% are plagiarized. At the very first instance that there's an issue, we try to pull the student aside to tell them the issues, to work through them in an iterative process to make sure that those problems are not happening again. So those are just a few ways that we're trying to be proactive. And another example of how we've used a specific metric being the number of essays that are being flagged for our staff to review, where we've been able to decrease that, or at least we've been able to decrease the percentage of those which are actual issues. And now we're looking at more, for those issues that are flagged, we're looking at formatting issues, or we're looking at the student has uploaded the wrong assignment, which are problems that I would much rather have. Excuse me, just getting a little bit more coffee. Second example I wanted to work with also is in regards to our writing program, but essentially is addressing problems that are introduced by having multiple people grading a population of students. So between any given course currently in traditional higher ed or college or university system, each course is run by faculty generally, and each faculty is grading on a specific standard. Any two faculty are probably not, they are not necessarily grading on the same standard, and that's what we're trying to eliminate. So our students are in a general population. We are assessing students on similar framework of assessments in terms of the papers that they are writing and that they're submitting. We're trying to use across the board the same rubrics for all students. So we really want to eliminate kind of the sense of subjectivity that's introduced when multiple graders or multiple evaluators are being used for a single paper. And the ultimate goal would be that if I, Joseph Thibault, grade a paper, and one of you also grade a paper, that we come out with a score that's very similar. And we do that, and we try to do that through proactive normalization, or we call it a norming session. And in a sense, it's kind of this collegial experience. Everybody gets a sample of papers. They're the same papers, and everybody scores them based on our current rubrics. And then we have a discussion or a listserv discussion or kind of a one-on-one consultation to find out how do we do based on that. How close did we come to grading each other on a similar basis, and then addressing the deltas between different graders and saying and thinking about What is it that we specifically value, and what is it in our rubric that is unclear, so that we are creating these inconsistencies. We do these on a very regular basis. They are very time intensive, but they are essential to providing a good experience to students. We run them every maybe 4 to 6 weeks, between as many as 20 staff at a time, in order to go through that process and to evaluate how we're doing. It's helped us improve rubrics over time. It's also helped us to clarify the kind of the values of the evaluation that we have. And as you can see, by looking at some of the stats that we're looking, so we're looking at coefficient of variation, standard deviations, looking at we're doing really simple statistics in order to kind of chart that over time. And we've seen a huge improvements as we've started working and increasing the frequency of these type of sessions in order to get a real kind of narrow differentiation between the different evaluators that we are working with for any given paper. So it's the main problem is that we have inconsistencies in grading when a student submits their draft and the student submits their final. And if you submit a draft and you get a X score, and you make improvements and then submit a final and get a lower score, there's cause for frustration and kind of friction, which is understandable, totally understandable. There's, that's it's an issue that I'm not proud of. It just is, that is a fact. And potentially, there's even the same grader we have seen, if they're grading a draft and then they're going through and they're grading other papers, and then several days later they get a final, they may also have inconsistencies in grading between the draft evaluation and the final. What we're trying to minimize is the occurrence of that. So we found that over time, by introducing better standards in terms of training, we've been able to decrease the number of students who are having this problem or that are encountered with this problem. And it's been a good way to improve, I think, the student experience in terms of the assessment. I have not seen the modification of the workshop module, but I am pretty stoked on the new assignment kind of feedback management system that allows you to delay the feedback, which would give an evaluator or multiple evaluators time to kind of double check assignments. Ultimately, I would love to have every student's assignment evaluated by more than one person, which is more of a like advanced placement or AP style assessment evaluation. It's a lot more it's a lot more intensive, but I think it's a much higher quality. We've started to do that on some final examinations, especially written finals, and the improvements have been really, really great. We've seen there's a lot of consistency. There's, that has helped us to ensure students that we're trying to be as objective as possible when we're doing the evaluation, and trying to eliminate the subjectivity on a grader by grader basis as students are going through. But there's some really cool tools available that will help to eliminate, if this is a problem that you also have, help to eliminate or help to facilitate improvement of this type of issue. So I'm going to switch gears and look at a little bit of kind of reactive information and how we have used that as well. So there's this notion of NPS stands for Net Promoter Score, and it's kind of an e-commerce measurement that's used across e-commerce, whether it be booksellers or Amazon or Netflix or other people like that. And banks use it all the time, or when you see the question, it's very specifically, would you recommend this company or experience or course or product, etc., to a friend? Usually it's on a scale of 1 to 10, and it goes from not likely at all to extremely likely. And the Net Promoter Spectrum basically is the percentage difference of those who rate 9 and 10 minus the percent who rate 0 to 6. So it discounts anybody rating 7 and 8, which you would assume is a very, very positive experience still. But those are deemed, quote unquote, as a passive The 0 to 6 are people who are a detractor. They're simply unsatisfied. And then the 9 and 10 would be the true promoters, people who actually probably or are most likely to actually kind of spread the word via word of mouth, or to recommend it to actually recommend it to a friend. Now you could use a 5-point scale. It is the same, but it's a net promoter is a good guideline. Is that I think there's a common thread is that if a student gives you a rating and they give you a 3, no action is necessary. Now, in terms of net promoter, if a student rating were to give a 3 and you're using a similar approach versus net promoter, a 3 is actually a detractor. Those students are not satisfied, or they're not as satisfied as can be. So I can definitely I'll look up a link to show the kind of the net promoter score framework, but any framework can be used. It's just a matter of making sure that we understand that on a rating of 1 to 5 even, you'll want to weight very specifically, probably 1 through 3 as being those are the students that we'll want to address to make their experience better. You know, them giving a 4 or a 5 is a much better indication that they've had a better experience or an acceptable experience. So we have collected over time about 3,000 course evaluations, which is not a huge data set, but it is enough information for us to start to look at trends over time. We look at it on a month-to-month basis. These are all attached to qualitative comments that students are providing. So the numeric measurement gives us a key to how and when we should look at or start to categorize the qualitative comments that students are giving based on course reviews and stuff like that. So, you know, there will never be a time that I probably don't read every single comment that a student gives and go through and we look at those at a kind of really in-depth basis to find out what is the general sentiment, what are the themes that we're looking at in some way. And we've also started to look at ways to automate the coding of those themes. And when I read through, and anytime, if you get a stack of course evaluations, creating your own themes by reading through them is not necessarily the most effective way in actually measuring what is going on, because there's certain, your personal bias will affect kind of what sticks in your head, what you remember when you start to kind of create those themes. So we've used tools like Mechanical Turk, which is an Amazon is an Amazon service basically, but it's a objective third party. You can pump in 100 or thousands or tons of qualitative reviews. You can set a couple different themes. You can kind of predefine, like, here are the issues that I think we have, or here are the issues that I think students are talking about. For example, they might be talking about exams or qualitative writing or assessment or technology or the final exam proctoring or something like that. Any issue that a student might frequently be talking about, those can be predefined. And then the third party, these objective third parties, are real people, but they'll go through and they'll code the information for you. So you can think of it as having somebody kind of crunch through and classify and actually come up with the themes that you might be looking at in qualitative work. And it can be, I've heard of organizations using it to kind of classify tweets, whether they're kind of happy or sad or something like that, or politicalization. But just the same, you can do it for qualitative reviews of coursework or qualitative comments from course evaluations to find out what are truly the things that students are saying, you know, and putting quantity to what was previously kind of the unquantifiable. Which has been a really interesting exercise. It's not expensive. I think we've pumped through maybe several thousand of the comments for less than $50 or something like that. But it can give some pretty valuable insight without a lot of time. It usually turnarounds maybe 15 or 20 minutes to get all that information back. And so, you know, it's pretty. It can be very interesting. Now, when we look at the course evaluations and reviews, one of the things I want to note is that we may use the information differently than you do. And a couple of the ways that I've used it is that we'll focus on a couple courses where, you know, we'll focus on the lowest performing courses first, but we also might focus on the lowest performing courses as a subset of our most popular. You know, if we have lots of students going through some courses and I have limited resources, I want to address the course that's causing the most problem to the most students. And that's just a matter of, that's how we tend to kind of block and tackle the different areas. But by and large, what we have been able to do over time is to use the data to inform us to kind of look at the student comments and information to find out what are specifics that are coming out in the comments that we can do to address those issues. Now, that all said, is that the dissatisfaction does not have to be permanent, which is an important aspect of a rating or this idea of net promoter score. Will a student recommend the experience? So we often, especially in the case with course evaluations, is as kind of a retroactive approach to try to improve quality. But what I think is problematic in that approach is that you're basically you're conceding that those students are having a bad experience and then they're just moving on. And I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. So we've started actually kind of trying to get a thermometer, trying to get the student sentiment temperature early on in the course as possible. If the student is coming in frustrated, there's triage and there's kind of personal attention that we can give to the student to make their experience better, to find out, why is it that the student is unhappy at the beginning of the course. And if they're going to be unhappy at the beginning of the course, the likelihood of them being unhappy at the end of the course is probably pretty high. But if there's stuff that we can do in order to kind of improve it, what was part of that? Is it just that the onboarding experience was bad? Is it that they just need a little bit of emotional support or something like that? Or is it that they just missed, they totally didn't understand, using a previous example, the plagiarism quiz. Like, they just don't get it. In the first or second topic, getting a quick rating from the student and kind of understanding where they're coming from is a great way to start to triage the issues before we do this kind of totally retroactive review in a course evaluation, which is usually a end of course evaluation, usually happens after the final. I actually think it's a problem currently in higher education that they're totally not addressing, is that we're only taking the temperature at one point, and then we don't care what happens to students. We only care what happens to the students that come after them. But those students that have gone through that experience are totally missing out on any improvements that we could have made early on if we had simply known about the issues that happen in day 1, day 2, day 3, or week 1, or month 1 of the student experience. So if I can impress upon you anything, getting information early is going to help you improve courses, because you won't be getting you won't just end up with a handful of angry students who have already taken the final and moved on, and then they're still ticked. So that's been an interesting thing to look at. Now, over time, we've been able to increase or decrease. We've seen improvements to our NPS scores. We've seen improvements to course ratings, and that, I think, is part of the one. It happens because we watch it. It's kind of that weird conundrum. And it also happens because we're being more proactive about reaching out to students and trying to detect issues and to resolve those issues early. It's exactly like that. And that has been a way for us to improve that process as we're looking at it, and to get our kind of thinking around, what are the areas of student experience early on that have downstream ramifications for their experience, or their perception of the company, or their perception of the course, or their perception of the faculty. Those things can be addressed very early on. So fourth and finally is looking at objectivity and consistency in quantitative assessments. So one of the we do a lot of quantitative assessment, multiple choice exams. Moodle is great at delivering quizzes and examinations, even with qualitative remarks. And we look at that on an ongoing basis, and we get a lot of, we have received from students feedback that, in some cases, a student will be presented with a question or a concept that they don't believe that they've seen it earlier in the course, which is obviously a problem when you're trying to set expectations and also assess students based on those expectations that you presented. So to combat that, we've been looking at very specifically kind of our cumulative course examinations to find out, all right, what can we do to improve these, and what can we do, or what can we learn from our end of course evaluations to understand where we may be deficient early on in the course. Now, originally we were using a lot of randomized test banks, and that actually was prohibitive to try to find out what it is unless you have really good metadata in and attached to the question items in order to distill that very quickly and easily to how each of those questions being asked is assigned to a specific learning objective or outcome in the course. Now, Moodle has gotten a bit better about this, and same with most other learning management systems. Looking at competency and attaching competency to specific assessment items is kind of this $20,000 question currently in education. You want to make sure that the throughputs and the inputs or the outputs have a one-to-one match if you can, and if you can identify that, you should be able to also identify where in the course experience students are, where we are lacking, and where in the assessment we may not be assessing students correctly. And you can identify all sorts of different things. So, essentially you would want something that maybe a little less funky than this bell curve, but in a sense, you want some type of normal distribution of students in terms of how they're being what the outcomes are actually showing. And over time, I think the goal would be, not by making the assessment easier, but by improving the course experience to move the normal distribution to the right. We want more students to be able to pass based on the information that we're providing them early. This is kind of the main focus of my work as of late. It's a huge problem. Or not necessarily a problem. It's a huge opportunity in terms of what data is available and the kind of tools that we can use in order to do the improvements. But there's a lot that needs to be set up early in order to make this work, so that we can get a good read on students as they're coming through. And even so, this is the same issue as the course evaluations. Is giving us information that we can use, but you can't use it retroactively. I can't fix the experience for a student who has not passed the course. So getting this type of information early on in earlier examinations is key and important. Now, the quiz statistics report, if you haven't used it in Moodle, is awesome. It does a lot of things that you will pay the nose through for psychometric evaluation, and it does them automatically. You can literally get the reports that a psychometrician might take days or weeks to try to go through and to get this information. You may spend thousands of dollars for them as they kind of get an export of your questions, crunch all these data, and kind of give it back to you in a format, quite frankly, that will look like what Moodle already provides out of the box. It's amazing. The ways that you use this become a little bit more complicated, because it's how do you go from something that looks like this, which is not giving me a huge information necessarily, and but what you'll want to look at is the item by item analysis to start to look at and to connect that to learning objectives. But ultimately, what one of my staff members has created most recently, based on information from the quiz statistics and on a fixed form. We are using a fixed form that's offered in a proctored environment, so has a little bit better test integrity than a fixed form. Well, has a way better test integrity offered than a form without any proctoring. So I have some assurance that the data is clean and clear, and it's not there's not a high level of cheating or anything like that. But what we'll be able to do is to connect learning objectives to the questions and to find out really specifically where we're not doing well in terms of assessing students, or we're not doing well. We may be doing well in assessing them, but we're not doing well in preparing them for those assessments. So, red, green, yellow is kind of the common in terms of, you're good, you're kind of good, and you're not doing very well. But, what I want to attack over time is that since we've been able to identify this through the small data set that we're getting from our examinations, is to eliminate the red. In a sense, we can start to look at our courseware early on, the course experience. We can look at earlier topics where these are covered, and start to address, what is it about the content that we already give that students are not getting? They're not being prepared for this material. Now, this begs the question: is the red simply the more difficult information? And that's possible. But like I said earlier, I'm a strong believer that it's the difficulty level is kind of this independent issue that we have to deal with. And I don't think that courseware can't overcome difficult concepts. And because if that is the case, nobody would be able to learn it. It's quite simply. So by looking at this and over time, what I would hope to do is to reduce what's in the red, to reduce what's in, and move that to the yellow. And then over time, address what's in the yellow and move that to the green. And what that should end up with is a much more coherent experience for the student as they're going through that. They always will have the correct expectations set. They always will understand what's going to be on the assessments. They'll be able to adequately prepare for that. They'll have additional resources available to be able to prepare for that. And I think overall what they'll end up being is a happy student. So this is what I get really jazzed about. This is what I'm most excited about working on for my day job. And the fact that Moodle does some of the statistical analysis is a great asset to not only to the community, but to improving kind of the course experience of Moodle in terms of learning objectives and making sure students have the right competencies as we're moving them through any level of education system. It's just, I think it's very cool. So the, sources of information where you can get any of this stuff, logs, gradebook exports, the statistics page of any of your quizzes, rubrics. You can use SQL queries. I'm not sure you have to, even at the kind of base level of getting and using this data. End of course surveys or the questionnaire module. I use Google Docs or SurveyMonkey to do our end of course evaluations. It doesn't have to be within Moodle. Google Docs is just as well. You don't have to use SPSS or other tools, and you don't have to have huge data sets to get a feel for what's going on. Exit interviews might be another way. Help desk tickets, I already mentioned. The number of requests or the number of emails or chats or phone calls, and getting some measurement tool about those to try to look at that. Those are the ways I think you can really impact the student experience, move everybody to that green area where they're able to be successful, at least successful as they are able to be, and they'll be happy as well moving through the course. But that is it. So I am very happy to enter, kind of bring any questions up if you have. We have about 15 minutes left, I think, maybe 20. So anything you want to ask, I'll try to look through, see if I missed any other questions. Is there a specific log entry in Moodle if the students preview the rubrics? I can think of two ways there. I've actually found that the way that Moodle displays the advanced rubrics is not as intuitive as you might think for students to view that information, which is a bit of a problem. So in the past, what I've done is kind of created a quick PDF and provided that as part of the assignment details. It's not perfect, especially if your rubric is ever changing and dynamic. But it is a better way to kind of put that forward to the students and make sure that they are seeing it. And of course, you could even require, if you were to create that as a resource, it doesn't have to be a PDF, it could be HTML, it could be, most rubrics resemble an Excel table. If you were to create it in Excel first, you might be able to display that really easily to the student in a web page and make that required viewing or conditional to actually opening up the assignment. Those would be the way to be proactive to ensure that students are getting the right information. That's a good question, though. Natalie, I have no idea. Mostly that's predicated on the fact that I have a minimal understanding of how that actually impacts kind of the end user and the administration of courses. So the question is, how do I intend to use the new logging and events for Moodle 2.7? I assume that it will improve kind of the overall experience, but I also assume that the improvements on the back end will take a little while to kind of actually have impacts to either the admin level or the even faculty level of administration of a course in Moodle. And it will take some time to kind of to get that information to connect those dots to make sure that we're getting that good information as it kind of filters up into ways that we can use it better. It sounds like it may be easier to kind of get that data to a third-party system or service in order to run reports on a regular basis. What I can say is that the reports that we're looking at in some cases have been exported, or rather, let me come at it from a different angle, is that with the information put off to a third party, you should be able to get reports a lot more easily and to crunch those data to create dashboards. What I found is that running, in some cases, if a report is a custom report run on a production database, you're going to crash your system. It's going to slow way down. It's not going to work, or maybe it'll time out or something like that. So there's so much underlying data in the SQL database or in any database that you're using to support Moodle. To do complex computations on that information in real time is not really effective, and it's going to make your site real latent. And getting that into a third-party system or capturing the log information elsewhere without kind of an automated backup restore process will be kind of key. And I apologize if I've given all sorts of misinformation. I'm not like a majorly technologically proficient person, so my understanding is kind of tools that I'm able to use or of ways to extract data that are familiar. We do use a lot of SQL queries in order to get that information. Sometimes a lot of the quiz information that we were originally exporting, we needed it in a different format than what the quiz, with the quiz module statistics was default providing. So we used basically SQL queries to get it in a number string, basically, of each of the student form submissions, and that was used in a program like SPSS in order to crunch the data. But looking at the stats and looking at the information, we found that we likely could have gotten maybe 95% the way there without because the psychometrics were already done for those questions. Are there some common barriers or issues from faculty when taking on new data collection initiatives in your experience? So I'll talk really specifically about my experiences that I have. Maybe it's both a blessing and a curse that I don't have the same issues that a traditional higher education institution has, because we run a very lean operation. So my academic team is 5 people. We work directly with technologists, our tech team at Straighterline, and our subject matter expertise and kind of our faculty are generally third party. So we contract with tons of individuals who are currently faculty, sometimes tenured, sometimes retired, former college presidents, all sorts of different individuals, adjuncts, all levels of educational background and experience who have delivered courses very similar to ours, but they're not part of formally kind of the Straighterline employees. And so we have a lot more leeway in terms of like if we can be a little bit more kind of forthright with a top-down approach of saying, these are the metrics we want to look at, and these are required because we control the course delivery and experience from on purpose, in a sense. We try to provide a really consistent look and feel to our courses from course to course. And obviously that this type of approach has a lot of benefits when doing some type of study or to try to get the data that we think we need in order to make change. So it hasn't been difficult in my experience, but that's not the case for others. Now that being said, consistency is definitely going to be key in terms of getting data and measuring it on a similar ruler or on the same ruler. And I think there's a lot of ways that are not obtrusive to that process that faculty would be on board with. And one of what would be quite in really simple approaches is that if your institution is already using course evaluations, ensuring that the same questions are being asked on all course evaluations is going to go a long way in making sure you have normalized data. Similarly, or I guess conversely, in an institution where you have a number of faculty and a number of adjuncts and a number of TAs all using or grading papers that are submitted, qualitative work that's submitted by students that you're expecting them to get feedback on. If you're not using a rubric system, or if you're not using a consistent approach, then there is going to be a lot of subjectivity in terms of how any standard is applied. And I think that there's actually been some movement lately, at least anecdotally, I've heard of this, where departments will get together and adopt a consistent metric in terms of either rubric style or something like that. Now, it's obviously a lot more, that's kind of a stickier issue. But I don't think it's impossible to overcome. I've heard examples of that happening from people that we've interviewed. We try to stay in touch with as many individuals in higher ed in the U.S. as possible through either the people that we're working with, et cetera. I would say that addressing the course by course or faculty by faculty inconsistencies is probably the hardest part of getting good data sets to analyze it on a course by course basis, especially if you want to look at that information across courses. Good deal. This has been it's been a joy. If there's no other questions, or if there is other questions, I'll post my email. You can always get me on Twitter. You can get us on. You can visit MoodleNews.com, or feel free to email me offline. But open book as much as I can be, and we'll get some of these slides may be slightly modified in terms of the copy that's provided to the iMoot, but I'll get the slide deck up and available as soon as possible.
That's great, Joseph. Thanks so much for that. I really appreciate the time and effort you've put towards this presentation. And on behalf of the iMoot team, I'd also like to thank you for your past support over the years, and in particular this year as well, once again, in promoting the iMoot event through MoodleNews.com. We really do appreciate your support. So once again, thanks for your efforts tonight, and everybody else, enjoy the rest of iMoot.
My pleasure.